Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right. Perfect. Just to restart, welcome to the Stoa, guys. Yes, happy holidays. And we have the lovely Forrest Landry here. He's someone that doesn't really need introduction. I hope you guys have really felt him over the last 3 weeks, not just his theories of around civilization and about personal development, but also understood him as a person, the real ethical, moral, principled person that he is. And he can probably better describe what those 3 words mean. But I hope you got a really good sense of what that looks like. And we want to end off today strong. And so we've actually done a whole bunch of different experimentations around these past 3 different sessions. So first off, it was just an open Q&A. The second session, we had Alanya jump in. And the third session, Forrest kind of did his own little collaboration, which is fantastic. So the fourth one was, again, going to be something that we'll see, and I'll leave it up to Forrest to really describe what that looks like today. But we're super excited to have him. And I wanted to open it up to everybody just to open up the throat chakras, really come present into this Zoom meeting today. And I'm going to ask everybody to potentially unmute for the next 10 seconds, just say hi to the whole group. And yeah, you guys can do so now.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you again.
Hello.
Same here, Forrest.
Good to see all of you.
Hi, Fred.
Hi, Fred.
All right.
Many blessings indeed.
Oh, I'm sorry, I muted everybody, so Forrest, you're now muted again.
Hopefully everybody can hear me now.
Yeah, I will pass it to you to describe maybe how today goes. I know last week we didn't have Alanya here, but we are lucky to have her presence as well. And yeah, I'll pass it to you to probably describe larger what this today will entail. I'm just here to help facilitate and make sure that everything runs smoothly. And yeah, I'll pass it to you first.
Okay, so with all that preamble, I really enjoyed the conversation we had last time in the exploration of how to think about community process and how to create community process and how to think about the, in other words, what kinds of questions would come up in connection with that. And I want to kind of distill that down a little bit. There was a lot of sort of collaboration for community, and we explored Alanya's story a bit. She's joined us again. And so I'm basically going to invite her to speak up when you wish, as you wish. But essentially the places where I'm finding that I have the most inquiry, where I'm really like, again, you know, to sort of just describe kind of what are my interests and explorations and what kinds of things I'm thinking about. You know, the notion of governance as a process is usually thought of as a really large scale thing, right? And I'm finding that as I explore this more, I'm really wanting to bring down to the interpersonal, like the specific relationships between people, particularly in families and in small groups, and particularly around issues where play is more the fundamental aspect. So for instance, if we're going to think about you know, governance as being a result of design, like instead of voting on a couple propositions, you know, that doesn't really make anybody happy, can we create a design principle that will allow us as communities to create options that literally everybody likes? And it's not just about consensus and stuff. It's about the design process that can enable consensus. So in effect, there's kind of a broad strokes interest in that, but where it really comes down is the level of the connections that people make with one another that evolve out of that connection, new potentials, new insights, new perspectives. What is generative in that space, and how do we protect that from basically going off the rails because we misunderstood what we were trying to do. Like, so for instance, occasionally, people are not even aware that that they're not even thinking about the same sort of things. There's not enough communication going on to enable people to recognize what are their bases of choice, what are the value systems, what are the design principles that they are essentially taking unconsciously. So in effect, this notion of play as enabling design, enabling flexibility of imagination, and enabling people to connect to one another in less do or die sort of ways, and more specifically, ways that are less about the individuals, the people who are trying to be somebody, versus the actual process. What is the thing that we are going to do? Like, what is the doing that we do together? So in that particular sense, it sort of comes down from this really abstract notion of governance down to something which is much more at the level of collaboration, and collaboration in connection to the notions of playfulness. So Lanya, you're covering your face. Tell me, what are you thinking?
I'm sorry. I'm just thinking of the brilliant idea that you had for me and Tom to show like the highest level of consciousness before we had taught about the deeper levels of consciousness.
Well, I'm coming around the other way. You see, we're doing it. We're starting at the lower
You're doing
level.
it again.
We're working up.
You're doing it again, Forrest. So it's just a fun story, but see, you're doing it again.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Too many abstractions. So coming back to where the inquiry is. The inquiry is, how do we encourage playfulness in collaboration, or collaboration that encourages playfulness? And on one hand, this is a research question. It's a template question. It's a practice question. But on the other hand, it's sort of an embodiment question. It's a sense of, what are the things that are sort of guidelines that help us to work together in more effective ways? And so essentially, what I'm asking people, what I'm asking you to think about, or asking you to sort of explore, is, what are the best practices? What are the best examples? What are the places where in life you have had experiences that are the most in the direction of playful collaboration, that felt fruitful, that felt alive? And reflecting on those experiences, what do you feel were the principles that enabled that to come to be that way? What are the things that, if you had to do it again, would not necessarily compel that kind of outcome, but would encourage it? Is there articles or research or other people that that have talked about such things, or written about such items that maybe I don't know and should read and would really learn from? Do you know of YouTube videos or of podcasts or things like that where this notion was explored deeply? Can we essentially, in some of the reflections that we have of our own experiences, find ways to help other people to know, or help me to understand how to help other people to know what good collaboration looks like, what it feels like, what would be the kinds of things that would enable that? So on one hand, we've, Lanya and I have explored, Lanya much more than I has explored, how to use group process, a collaborative process, to do some really deep healing, some really, fundamental sort of restructuring of things once a person has had some difficult experiences in life. Whereas in this particular sense, I'm sort of looking at, well, what would the other side of that look like? So say you've gone through trauma therapy, you've gotten to the point where you're healed, and you're now looking at your life, and you have some opportunities to have some fun. Say maybe COVID has gone away and you can actually hang out with your friends again. What would be a good process that would enable playfulness in that space, that is actually generative, that goes beyond the self, goes beyond just the personal and into the transpersonal? So that's kind of where my inquiry is. Those are the questions that I'm thinking about. Alanya, go ahead.
Yeah, right. So thank you again for letting me come in. And I just want Forrest, like, I just need to go back a little bit and then go fully with you in.
Great.
This is a grand and good example of two deeply friends that are experts in communication and cannot communicate good enough. So I heard that you had my case on the last STOA group, and I didn't know that. And I didn't know that I was invited in, and Forrest didn't know that I didn't know that I was invited in. So he went on. And I've seen the video from your last session, and I just wanted to say, like, of great, deep gratitude, and I'm really touched about your willingness to taste and to ask questions that were important. And I do hope that I can have some little bit of time today, if there is people from the last session. There are some questions that were raised there that I can answer, and I would love to as well. And I also know that where Forrest is going now is also a place that I would love to join in and go towards. So, and you know, Forrest is like, you also pointed out in the last session about the word devotion. And I want to say something about that, because to me, devotion is the line in your life where you see what you cannot not do is your devotion. So my whole life journey started out with stones in the water and the ones dry on the land. Like, why were the stones in the water so beautiful and the ones on the land so ugly? And I could sit for hours just putting the ugly stones into water and see them become beautiful, and then dry up and see them become like crooked and old and cold and whatever. And that's been my devotion all my life. What is the inner light in the person, and why does it look so not likable? Or why does it look so likable, and why am I terrified of what's on the inside? So this thread of devotion is also what will lead you to your freedom. And so this is why we're so in need of working with our traumas, because they're locked energies. And when they blow up and we can release the contractions in our body, then we can embodiment joy. And I'm not saying that everyone should go in therapy. I'm just saying that stay super curious to the things that you cannot not do in your life, because that's a leading thread to what brings happiness and freedom in you. So I think that might be a starting point for that. And I hope that I will have 5 minutes at some point to just bring back to the group my reflections from your last session.
Okay. Well, in surfacing of all the questions and possible directions that we can go, considering that this is an open conversation and we're trying to essentially invite people to speak, let's do a round of open collaboration in this moment as to where people are feeling drawn to. What questions can you not think about?
And would you like them to unmute or put them in the chat?
Yeah, if people want to basically line up in the chat, and then as you see them in the chat, call them out and unmute them so that they get the option to speak, just so that we don't have people trying to see who's going to speak next.
Okay. I would advise do similar to last week, actually, to raise your hand. If you guys understand, because I'm host, I actually can't see how to make that happen. But I think if you go to participants, there's a raise hand button. And Evan potentially just raised his hand as the first person, probably explain it better than I can. But I think this is a fairly orderly way so that people can see, who's chatting next and what's the line. Evan?
Yeah, so this is something that's been coming up for me a lot lately that seems really directly related to where you wanted to take the inquiry today, Forrest. So I think about the so-called thrive and survive dichotomy, or the explore and exploit dichotomy, and how this affects people and civilizations. Something that's really important to me is that this sort of authentic, joyful, playful sense-making and choice-making that results in generativity is kind of scaffolded on, or in many ways dependent on, people's ability to have their basic needs met and a sense of physical safety and security that so many people in the modern world don't have. And some of this is due to psychological trauma, and some of it is due to bad mechanisms for resource distribution, and so on and so forth. So I'm curious about your thoughts in this area, because we see the scene of people having these conversations coming from a fairly elite slice of the world. and even a fairly elite slice of Western culture. And so I'm curious as to how you would think of dealing with that dynamic a bit.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, I can offer a little bit of commentary since you're asking me specifically, but I can basically point out that what you're referring to is a real thing, right? That if people don't have their basic needs met, there's this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if the lower needs aren't addressed, then the upper needs don't get addressed. And a lot of the work that I've been concerned with has been sort of how do we do systems design and how do we create a capacity for communities to meet their own needs rather than being extractive from nature. You mentioned this whole thing about explore and exploit, and that's a really important framework, and it's one that's crucial to understand, because if we're going to do humanity right, then to some extent we need to not have that exploitation be so one-sided, right? There needs to be an ecology of that, and people that are struggling to survive to some extent need to be helped by people who have already survived. And so in effect, part of the reason why collaboration becomes important is because we don't necessarily know how to help another person unless they're participating. So in effect, there's a sense of draw the stakeholders in, and then somehow ensure that the process of that collaboration doesn't end up becoming selfish with respect to the kinds of inequity dynamics that normally emerge in social process. So in effect, there's a need for us to essentially understand how to do that, both at the scale of the large, but also at the scale of just like literally one-on-one relationships. So in effect, there's a sort of perspective I've learned very recently, which is some people are striving to be somebody. They want to attach a sort of experiential component to their lives through their firsthand relationships, and other people orient more around doing things. They're trying to create some sort of outcome. And I think that in a large respect, my personal concerns have more to do with doing things. I'm not so interested in being famous. In fact, I kind of cringe at the notion. I'm a somewhat private person. I basically have various intellectual flavors and some personal deficiencies that just make it really hard for me to be with people. So in a sense, there's a recognition that if we're in a sense going to work together, if we're going to do this collaboration thing to create the possibilities for meeting the needs of the community, we're going to want to understand how to make that work in a very local way. We're going to want to understand how to think about different orientations from which people come from, such that they can work together to essentially create outcomes that are beneficial. But if we make it just about the work, then you end up in this sort of extractionary perspective with respect to your own life. So that sort of explore, exploit thing, I'd love to somehow have the explore thing not be about exploring how to do better exploitation, which seems to be what the entire business world is about today. Right? We see huge amounts of really studied perfection at optimizing for exploitation of markets and of people. And so in effect, this inequality thing just really gets out of hand. So in this sense, to sort of enable us to do exploration, recognizing that I'm not going to be able to solve the whole problem of everything on the hierarchy of needs, but to somehow have it so that we don't end up getting confused when people are at the top end of that hierarchy of needs and they're saying, hey, I'm operating on behalf of the world. I'm trying to do things that are civ design and so on and so forth. And in the Silicon Valley sense, it can get converted into this sort of trite, make the world a better place. And that ends up becoming a vehicle by which the people at the top basically manipulate the people to do things that are actually to that individual's private benefit, but not actually to the benefit of the commons. So I want to be more discerning about that. I want to find out how to do collaboration, which is genuinely in the space of help the world to become a better place. I'm not going to make it a better place, but through the actions that I take, I can maybe create a more likely outcome that the commons, just even my local community, the people that I happen to be friends with, but who are just around, like that I don't end up exporting risk. I don't end up exporting cost. That in effect, I can help my friends without hurting others. And so that exploration of how to do collaboration, how to do play together that doesn't end up having these sort of exploitative aspects feels somehow like a model of how to think about design evolution in this space. And so that's where my inquiry sort of ends up centering, because quite frankly, I don't feel like I understand this well enough to give a good advice, and I'd like to. Alani, you had a mark?
Yeah, I would like to share from my experience living in the war in Angola. I had patients in the Norwegian psychiatry that I couldn't meet. Like they had a kind of fear that was deeper than I've ever encountered being safe and white in a Norwegian country. So I went to the war in Angola to literally experience PTSD onto myself to find out how can I meet these people. And the one thing that I really learned being in the war when the court curfew, now what is it called when they say you can't go out anymore until the curfew, when that was on, everyone was out, and then they turned on the music and they danced the whole night until the curfew was over, and then they went home, slept for some hours, and then they did some work, but most of them didn't have any work. So they were dancing of joy because they needed to. They needed to stay alive. And, there was no safety. Like the bomb could go off anywhere at any time. So there was no safety. There was no of these fundamental things in the pyramid at all. They couldn't trust each other, but they could trust that they would dance for these hours. And so they did. Or they were singing in the graveyard over their lost ones at night. I could hear them singing. And this is a part of the culture that we've forgotten. And they are in need of being alive in a place that creates death. And, there were not men left, like there were 10 women per man in that country. And so I couldn't teach about jealousy, like no one would understand anything about what I said, because the surroundings that they were living in were so different to anything that we are encountering, of unsafety, of losing our beloved ones, of losing children. But still, they had this joy, they had this playfulness, and it didn't matter who you were, if you were the diamond dealer with a lot of money, or you didn't have money at all. So in a way, it points back to, Forrest, what we're talking about also. It's like what inspires us as humans to unite and not stay in separation. And I think one of the people from the last group, he said something about slowing down. And with the COVID situation, we've got this incredible opportunity to slow down, to really taste into what matters, which relations matters, and who to relate to, and who will I unify with. And I'm seeing this incredible stoa with a lot of super intelligent and fantastic people. And I'm like, my longing in this world is that everyone understand that we have a gift to bring into devotion. And that's one part of the whole that is needed for inspiration for the world. So I'm like curious to everyone here, like, what is your gift? What is for you to be devoted to? And how can you bring that into this community so that you can lift with your inspiration together with other in inspiration to inspire humanity? I was deeply inspired by the people that just danced because they knew how to dance, and they did.
Yep. That's absolutely perfect. And I appreciate the groundedness of that too, the specificness of the actual recognition that play is essential, that relief valve is so much a part of why we are alive, both in the sense of creating the capacity to continue to live, but also to create the capacity to live at all. So yeah, these are not idle inquiries. These are real questions, and to really be exploring these things, this is not a trite matter. This is deeply profound material. next thought.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add in here, there's a deep appreciation actually of the format that we've come at here, where we're really hearing from the whole of STOA, thanks to you, Forrest, and want to encourage everybody, especially those who haven't talked in the last 4 weeks, to really potentially put your hands up and share your gifts, and realize that this is potentially one of the few opportunities that we have both Forrest and Alanya here. So if you guys want to raise your hand, feel free to do so. Yeah, I'll pass the mic over to Chris now to chat.
Yeah, hey Forrest, hey Alanya. I was thinking about Michelle Bowen's article, Start With Who. And the reason I point this out is because I see people that are life coaches, facilitators, storytellers, wanting to do the community thing, but then you realize that you're missing the plumber. You're missing the one who does the electricity. And so my read or my take on what I want to inquire about is, how do you balance a diversity of skill sets while trying to come to some sort of coherence without trying to be overly selective?
Well, I hear that question. In fact, that's actually one of the, it's connected back to a question I think Alanya and I have both been exploring quite a bit. A lot of her training had to do with leadership and the notion of what leadership is. The way we think of leadership today versus its more true foundation are quite a bit of variance. When we tend to sort of, as a community, as a culture, tend to idolize certain roles and functions and not others. And, it's I was writing in a thing, there's no contract between the heart and the lungs. There's no piece of paper that basically says, I'll give you X units of pumped blood if you give me X units of oxygenation. It's just not how the body works. And so in effect, there's a recognition that all of the organs, all of the systems are necessary for the whole. And that if we want to think about systems design, we really need to think about it in a holistic way. We want to think about community design. We need to think about it in a holistic way. But there's a lot of habits that we bring along with us as human beings, right? We cannot help but see from our own point of view. And we can't help but hear the people that are speaking the loudest because they're just, that's what they do, right? So for instance, there's a sense here of trying to create a kind of distributed feedback process that isn't filtered through just one point of view or one particular regulatory mechanism, but through many, right? The notion of checks and balances, for example, in governance is part of this. But the idea is that you want a real variety of checks and balances. You want a real variety of communication paths. You want to, not just a methods to ensure that all the stakeholders are participating and are involved and invited, but also to essentially to sort of help things to basically cohere with one another through a variety of different overlapping methodologies. Play and collaboration is one of these important overlapping methodologies. They're all important. And so I think that part of what we're looking at is sort of how to explore these distributed things that don't necessarily rely on some sort of centralized leadership process or centralized narrative, right? You don't necessarily need everybody to believe the same thing in order for it to be a community. You just need them to care about one another, to genuinely be good at caring about one another. And so to some extent, I keep trying to come back to the caring and the relationships and how do we play together? How do we live together? How do we communicate? And, obviously that's going to wrap in the who and the where and the when, and specifically the what, right? If we get the who, what piece of it, the when, the where, and the how and the why will mostly cohere. But I think that the notion of the who and the what, that's where conversations really become alive. That's where we can feel the relationship, where we can sense the connectedness. Melania, please.
Yeah, I was thinking about last time Robert Gray, you're here, but I can't see you alive, had something about the caretakers, and there's also someone saying caring isn't enough. No, but it is fundamental when something is to be birthed. Like, a newborn child needs someone to care. And there's also this with, if we want a new community, or we want to create a new world, or we want to create something that is better than what it is now, it will need to be cared for, and it would need to be protected as it is emerging. And you know, if we're going to create something new, we will need the head of Forrest and his heart, and your head and your heart, and it all needs to be in there, both heart and head. And I want to say this from the last session, where someone asked if there was some default on my case. And yes, absolutely, there were. And it comes down to discernment. So my head knew that the person that I wanted to take into training would need some work on his own traumas. But my heart said, like, where else in the world will he be met and loved and cared for while he's working on his trauma? So my heart won, my head should have, you know? And so, because not everyone wants to heal, and that was the case. So there's also this about discernment, and that's why we need the people that have the heads for that. And we also need the people that has the heart to stay at home, to be there when someone flies in and needs to be taken care of. And so, like, I don't think it's either or, it's both. And this is why we need all the geniuses to come together and bring their part that is important into the pot of leadership. And I also like to think about the new leadership that we need is a surrendered leadership. It's not a surrendered leadership. Thank you.
The point about discernment is incredibly relevant too, because when we think about protecting that which is precious, that which is sacred, right? A lot of it, we tend to think of it in terms of outside boundaries, you know, where we put up the walls, who we include or not include. But honestly, that's not actually where the essence is. I think to some extent, it's important for us also to think about the day by day, moment by moment interactions. You know, in this specific moment, have we been discerning enough to notice whether things are just starting to go off the rails, or whether they're coming into a place that's more convergent on beauty and joy and thriving and all the good things? Obviously, there's going to be times where, you know, we'll be in the valley, we'll be in the shadow, and there will be other times where we're in the light and that things are joyful. And to some extent, to be able to discern how the small moves make the difference over the long term as to what those overall courses are going to be and what the meaning of those moments are overall. Philip?
All right, great. Next up, we have Christian.
Hey, Forrest. Hey, Lanya. Hey, everybody. Sometimes this happens when I'm about to ask a question in a session where I get this knot in my solar plexus and a lot of emotional energy. And I hadn't quite figured it out, but I think it has something to do with feeling how much bigger the question is than my comprehension is. Something maybe. Still trying to figure that one out. But what's coming up for me draws a little bit on the conversation we had earlier with Jordan earlier in the day. Partly what I said last session about the slowing down and the taking breaks, and including how I'm doing that right now with myself. I'm taking like 4 days of like true holiday to give myself some space to kind of create space for next year, really. And hadn't done that before and didn't even know what I was doing. But as I've been letting go of my sense of urgency about things, I find a more playful vibe coming up. And I realize part of what's difficult about that is all my concerns and where my urgency does come from largely has to do with death ultimately, or wanting to continue being alive. And I've done a lot of work with, confronting the idea of death and getting more comfortable with the idea of death, which I think maybe affords me an ability to get into this very existentially playful mode. Not that I've mastered it or anything. And the question that brings up for me is how we can help people face and release, or at least be in right relationship with the fear of death. This brings to mind ideas about like rites of passage from childhood into adulthood. Um, and I think a lot of our past reference points for that are like in shamanic, indigenous, early cultures. And I imagine that process might have some elements of that, but might be quite different today. Maybe it's a longer process. Maybe it starts later in life. I don't know. But the questions about what that looks like to help people transition in their life from childhood to adulthood to face these kinds of deep existential fears of a loneliness, death, uncertainty, such that they can then find it, they can internally resource themselves to get into a playful mode. Because as we talked about with Jordan earlier, part of playing is a willingness to die in the play, to die to who you are, or in my case, like letting go of my like very material concerns about my how to subsist and a real death. So that question of maybe like a new rites of passage for people that help people with this process of facing these deep fears.
I think that when I reflect on some of the ways in which I've encountered and explored those same questions in my own life, I'm reminded of this parable. You imagine a beach, and you're on the beach, and you have the option of making a sandcastle. And even while you're doing the making of the sandcastle, you're aware that the tide will come in, and that whatever it is that I make with that sandcastle, that the tide will literally undo, if in the model, if every stone taken off of every other stone and made into this perfect flatness. So I know that the things that I do here will not endure beyond some period of time. Maybe if I'm really effective at writing books, people will benefit from those for maybe a few hundred years, but that change is. And if I am on the beach and I'm thinking about, am I going to make a sandcastle knowing that the tide will come? Well, I could not make the sandcastle, and when the tide comes and returns it to what was the state before, you couldn't tell that I had done so. But you also couldn't tell that I had not done so. In other words, it may as well be the case to make the sandcastle. You may as well play. You may as well enjoy the gift of the time that you have to build something beautiful, knowing that it may be the case that no one will ever see it. It may be the case that in some day in the future that there will be no trace that is left behind that you had ever been there at all. And so in effect, it's this comes back to do you want to be someone or do you want to do something? Well, I think in terms of doing things. So to me, the choice is, do I build the sandcastle or do I just grieve that I can't make it last? But the value is in the doing. The value is in the being, the process of enjoying life, to really embrace that. And I don't think that there's anything wrong in making a sandcastle that doesn't endure. That's as far as I've gotten with that reflection at this point, and it's still an ongoing meditation.
I would love to add something. So could you imagine a place where you are the awareness and then there's only darkness around you and nothing is happening? Nothing is good, nothing is bad, nothing is moving. There's actually no time. It's just black. But you are observing it, but you don't know it's you or if you're a part of a you. What would happen? So after a while, after 5 days in that darkness, I came to the conclusion absolutely nothing is happening. Is that death? No, it's not. But the seeking ends and there's peace. any point, I, or the awareness that I am, can create if I choose to. Or not. Having encountered death twice, like I really would recommend that for every human being. It's like incredible, because you really get to understand the difference between your soul and your body, and that your soul is in your whole body, and you long to be able to understand the bigger picture of you, which is also that vast darkness, which is absolutely nothing and everything. But for me, like we can have situations in Avalon, the retreats that I run, that suddenly one person says, I feel death. And you know, that's contagious. Then I have 7 people that suddenly, I feel death too. And then, you know, I bring them a blanket and I say, well, then die. It's okay. Go ahead. Feel that. Taste it. And I would really recommend that. Take the time it would take for you to really feel how it feels to lay 6 feet under. Then you can integrate that into your life after, because eventually you need to pee and you'll get up and do that. You're a human being, you know? So life will come to you and say, like, I'm itching, or I need to pee, or I need to eat, or this was boring, or whatever it is. Like tasting death, you can actually do in your bed. And it's just seeking towards silence. And that is a beautiful thing. And as Christian said, like, slow down. If you get a taste of death, it brings you a stopping of the seeking, and you are so much more into the just being. And then every opportunity in that.
Occasionally I get asked, why is there something rather than nothing? Can only choose to do nothing in one way. But everything else, every other choice that you would make would be a something. And there's an infinity of those ways. So if we weighed each of these as equal probabilities, the chances of there being something is very much greater than the chances of there being nothing. Might as well enjoy it. Philip, back to you.
All right, some profound stuff. I am looking to do a creative move where I know we have 2 people with their hands up. I think after this, I would love to have it just go back to questions in the chat. And then that way we can have a better understanding of what we're feeling, so people can +1 and understand. And also gives an opportunity for those people who don't want to be on video to potentially have me ask certain questions, and I can be discerning around, okay, which questions make most sense. But so I'll give the opportunity for these final 2 to ask their questions, and then starting now, feel free to leave questions in the chat and have people vote those as well, so we can better understand what the room is feeling. But yeah, now I'll pass it to Caitlin.
Hi. Okay, so I'm going to kind of be forming this question as I speak. So there's a little bit of vulnerability that I'm feeling right now. I'm thinking about play and the commons and community, and the question that Evan brought up earlier of needs being met, and how we can meet people across different, you know, I mean, obviously socioeconomic statuses, but just in general, like meet different people in play without, like, it's really easy for me to play with my best friends, right? Because I have such a shared intimacy with them that I know what they can access, like what kind of play they can access, and I know how to bring them into it easily. And I'm thinking about like what like what happens when we feel called into play with someone or a group of people that we don't have that great an intimacy with. And like the process of letting go of our own idea of what the play is going to be, and let go into what needs to be created in connection with that person or group of people. I see this in my kids. I have 2 young kids who are 4 and 6, and one of them really, really likes to tell what the other one likes to tell the other one what the play is going to be like. And you know, it obviously works a lot better when it's collaborative and fun. So I'm not sure how to wrap up this question, but these are the thoughts kind of swirling in my head right now is, you know, if we have an idea for like a community project that is going to bring people together to, you know, do this thing that we think is really important, and then we get everybody in a room and it ends up being a completely different thing, you know, like what are the, like how can we bring ourselves into that space to let go of our own feelings of what is the most important, and to not try to impose that on other people, and honor the idea of play and community building.
I hear that question, and I hear actually several leading up to it. So I want to give voice to some of the other questions, which I heard as flavors in this as well, in addition to what you ended with. What is the way in which we think about play in community versus play in small groups? So, for example, when we look at larger groups of people, play becomes performative. You know, we have musicians, and then there's a group of listeners, right, or something like that. That's part of the reason why I was exploring collaborative process more than community process, in the sense that if we were to you know, try to find out what is important, that to some extent I don't want to impose that, but if it's a larger group, you know, to some extent I got to explore that, not in a sense of saying this is what should be important, but try to discover, explore, and find out what is important. I hear some flavors of you know, how does intimacy and play interact? You know, to what degree does a sense of comfort and familiarity enable play? I heard the notion of needs, like in a community, for example. There's a lot of spaces where, and I actually hate to say this, but sometimes people view communities as a kind of resource. They say, oh, this is a place where people will take care of me, and you know, in effect, you end up with a sort of free rider problem. And so in effect, if I'm thinking about play in a collaborative sense, to not only just discover you know, what is important, but also to not have it be so contingent about meeting needs or coming from needs. You know, that there's a kind of non-contingency there, that in effect I'm allowed to explore without being afraid that I'm going to hurt somebody or hurt myself, either now or in the future. And to have that basically be something that the collaboration is allowed some discernment, some freedoms around. Because if I'm coming from too needy a place, then I'm not playing. I'm working. I'm trying to solve a problem. But if I don't know what problem it is that I'm trying to solve, then I need to explore a bit. So there's a playfulness in the questions. There's a playfulness in the inquiry as to, you know, what are the kinds of things that we can ask that maybe would be, that we didn't know that we could ask, but that as soon as we realize those to be a question, it opens up whole new fields of activity. You know, another question that I heard in some of that was, you know, can we tell anyone else what play is or is not? Right. So, you know, do I have any real way to know what's going to be fun, even for myself, in the future? Right. What's fun for me right now might be very different than what's fun for me tomorrow, and vice versa. So, you know, these are just some of the flavors. And again, I don't necessarily have answers to these questions, but I did want to reflect that I heard some of that as part of it. Alana, you just raised your hand.
Yes, I did. I think this very often happens in a group, and very often when it's a new constellation, we actually don't know if the other one will like me or not. And as a mother of 5 children, I think I have a little bit in my back on that. Also, what I do know is that when something becomes awkward in a new group or fearful, we are human beings. And what we do, either we go in our trauma responses, which is fight, flight, flee, or aggressive, or hiding, or what all of these things are. But the first thing we do is like we check the person that we see had the most of integrity, how this person is responding. And from that, we are choosing how to respond ourselves. And this was also talked about in this group last week. Like, this is how we navigate, and also how children navigate. So if your daughter feels that the other daughter has more integrity in some form, it might be a relief for her that she is telling what they are to play. But there might be the other way around, that this one feels that she has more integrity and therefore the other one should listen. And so it also comes down to maturity and what we are seeking. And if we want to play, we want to play with people that are willing to see us. And, you know, this is what we crave for as human beings, to be seen, loved, and validated. And so if there's a chance for me to be seen, loved, and validated into a group of people, I might be willing to take a risk. If I don't take the risk, I will not be able to have as much fun as I could. So it's also up to the people of maturity to what level of risk are they willing to take to create playfulness and safefulness enough for us to play together. And, you know, a person that is free and that can make jokes about themselves is much more fun to play with than people that don't do that. And we all know that, right? So we're looking to the people that looks like they know how to handle themselves. And from that, I can decide whether I can hold myself or not into this playfulness or into this creation and co-creation. Is there room for me? Will I be seen? Will I be loved? And will I be validated? These are like ground navigators that we have for us to be willing to include ourselves into a play or a game. And, you know, that could be great fun. So if you find yourself a place where it's no fun, then leave and make it. And this is where I felt also for Caitlin, like, if you can ask that question, you also have the answer. You can create that form of playfulness.
When I hear you speaking of that, I'm reminded of the earlier thing, and there's this interesting parallel that, you know, you were speaking about people who in a wartime situation that were so unsafe, yet they were able to play also. So it's like there's this pull, right? For instance, if I've given up, you know, if like in one sense, it's like I want to feel that I'm going to be accepted into this situation, you know, then I'm going to feel more freedom to play. Whereas if I feel like, okay, this situation is so completely unsafe, I'm accepted just because I'm here, I might as well, right? There's no barrier. There's nothing more to lose, right? I've been pushed all the way to the other wall, so to speak. And so that's actually a very interesting sort of thing, that in each case we have this this sort of observation that there is a kind of contingency on how do we feel in relation to the process. You know, what is our come from space, and you know, it's either good safety that's strong and solid, or the complete absence thereof. But either way, they create the conditions, and that it's sort of like it's a resolving of the sense of who am I in this activity. Anyways, it's just the thought that I was having based on some of the things you were saying, and I think that's actually a real important observation, that we can't not be ourselves present in our play. It can't not be an embodied thing. It has to be a personal thing. Just some reflections. Philip, you had another person you wanted to speak.
Yeah, we have one final person with their hand up, and then, yeah, I'm happy to look through the chat for questions. Feel free to upvote so you guys can have a say in terms of questions as well, just to help. And yeah, pass it to Robert next.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so you talked in the very beginning about research, and I got to do a lot of PhD research with teams and organizations. So I'm going to kind of load in a bunch of information and as quickly as possible. So like I worked on a grant one time that had a biologist, an educational scientist, a statistician, a data scientist, two like professional grant people. And like it was a 2-year project that took a year just to sync up cognitively. There was so much expertise overloading that it took like a human year to get us to be able to write a grant that ultimately like brought $1 million into the system or somewhat. And so that's really interesting when you talk about like the commons and community and those kind of things of just like maybe my feeble human brain doesn't realize it could take a year to orient. And then I also, there's other research showing that like you need a leader or a teacher to actually grow. So when you were talking about like lingering or savoring or slowing down, like I was wondering maybe if it takes a long time, who are the people, because I've had a really good maybe meditation teacher, like who are the people that can help me slow down so that I can then connect into this beautiful opportunity that is culture or something like that.
Well, I hear one thing that I actually want to comment on specifically. I don't actually believe that we necessarily need a teacher to learn something. So for example, there are examples of isolated groups that were deaf in remote places that basically created a brand new sign language, that they effectively developed a new communication methodology. And obviously in situations like that, there's no one there to teach them that language. The language emerged from the dynamics of their interaction. Now that may be a really exotic case, but it does suggest that to some extent we do learn from one another, that it isn't necessarily the case that we always have to defer to some sort of authority process. I do think that in a lot of cases, going back to Lanya's point earlier, that we do look to people that have integrity. We do look to people that have developed some level of maturity, and that this is a natural way to bootstrap and to load in, as you were saying earlier, a lot of experiential information. It's probably better, for example, for us not to learn that the stove is hot by having experienced that firsthand. It might be nice if we like could just be told, hey, by the way, you'll burn yourself if you touch that, and believe them. Some of us learn only experientially, and some of us can learn a little bit less directly, and hope that our less embodied knowledge doesn't end up being too disadvantageous. I think though that going back to, I think, what is more your main point, which is that when we think about how much effort is it going to take to bring people into alignment, like, in one sense, I think we significantly underestimate the amount of time that good communication actually takes. That we are such complicated beings, ourselves and our social lives. There's so much narrative, there's so much story, there's so much history, that for us to come to know one another well enough to basically be able to have some hypothesis as to how to work together, that takes a lot longer than I think people generally allocate. It leads me to sometimes for process which is collaborative and such like that. I mean, a lot of times when we think about doing work together and a lot of business situations, they set up a research and development department, and then they don't really want to invest in people developing relationships with one another. They just want to invest enough so that the research can produce some product that they can immediately commercialize. And I think that to a large extent, we lose a lot of the human experience when we optimize too much for business. That we kind of lose track of why we are here at all. What is this all for? And to slow down and to enjoy that kind of collaborative process, to find out, what is it that is the genius that exists between us, rather than immediately yoking it to some sort of business interest. Anyways, this is one of those sort of pet peeves of something that I'm sort of working on trying to describe in a better way, maybe a little less pejorative, I suppose. But anyways, those are some of my thoughts. Lonnie, do you have something?
Yeah, like I haven't learned anything from meeting you, Forrest. And I truly believe you just came into my life to, like you did say, like you're on a test on Anja Forsberg, and I was like, what? And then I didn't understand what you said for 2 or 3 hours, but I think I nodded the right places because I got through the test in some way. I don't know how, but there is something about this. What do you want to achieve? Where is your devotion? Is your, and this was talked about much about in the last session you had, it's like, where are the people that are in devotion, that has found their gift and is willing to like not come with their ego, but coming with their gift into the collaboration? And I think that is, we are all seeking that. Some part of us is seeking the union, where I am as important as you are. And in my belief, it's like I'm looking for, where are the people that are willing to give up their, like they're like, okay, I'll give up Avalon. I don't need Avalon. I've been serving. Avalon has served me. I serve Avalon. But that's not why I'm here, you know? And I know you, Forrest, you've been searching for years. Where are these people? Like, why don't they step up? And also, I really need to come back to this. We change because we have to, like the story from Africa, they had to dance because otherwise there will be no dance. Or we are inspired to. And this is like where my whole life is. Like I was reading all the books about people that inspired. Like, what did Madame Curie have? Florence Nightingale, all these people, they had something special, something extra, something more than themselves. And it is when we come to the point that we understand that if we're going to build something beautiful together, I need to see the need for you, and you need to see the need for me. And there has to be a willingness to give. But then we also come to the part where people cannot understand, you know? I have 5 sisters. They think I'm out in the world doing my ego thing to be a guru or something. And you know that in a way it gives a little bit of joy to my heart, because it's so far away from where I'm at and what I want. But this is their world, you know? And so I wouldn't invite my sisters to collaborate in this great need that I have for devotion, to meet others that are willing to surrender to divine forces within themselves. And you know, when we surrender to divine forces within ourselves, our person is very often hurt by that. But we know it's pure and we would do it again. And so I'm looking for, like, where is my inspiration? Well, my inspiration is to work with people that can surrender and that can bring something bigger than themselves through, and to honor their lineage, and to say, hey, I've learned this from this person and that person and this person. And it brings me to a place today where I can honor the gift that I want to give. And then you can say whether that is a good or a fucking not good thing. But I will deliver it anyway.
I hear this. There's some beautiful elements in the thematic of this, and again, I'm still exploring. Some of these ideas are new. I'm just figuring out, even as I'm hearing this, is you know, what I was speaking to earlier in the sense of people who are trying to develop a certain relationship in their lives, a certain experiential perspective, the be somebody people, versus the do something. And there's obviously both, right? I mean, there's all kinds of people in the world, but if I were to just sort of look at how do I be discerning about this process of, you know, coming into collaboration, coming into playfulness, if there's too much of an orientation around I am the source, or you know, there's too much attachment, then it doesn't come through, right? It arrives at their being, and then they sort of dole it out in a sort of small way, and it ends up coming out in chunks. It's like too small. You ended up with this grand revelation, but instead of bringing the wholeness of that forward, you bring in little pieces. So I think that one thing that I'm looking for is people that can get out of their own way, that they can essentially focus on the needs of the community, and they're not necessarily diminishing their own needs. They're not out of touch with their humanness. They're not out of touch with the fact that they would probably like to have a nice bed to sleep in, and some food on the table, and some companionship that is genuinely going to be like accepting and so on. That in effect there's a sense that once those sort of things are healed in the sense of not being a trauma, that there's a kind of freedom that comes if you allow it to be, right? If we get caught up in the space of, okay, who is what, and so on and so forth, we can sometimes hold back the gift. Whereas if we think about the nature of, or we feel into the nature of, that the giving itself has a certain satisfaction, has a certain flow to it. And, that's held very consciously. It's held in the sense of, that I'm able to give, and that the giving isn't going to be with strings attached. And if that gift is received, that it's received fully, and there's no cost involved in the actual exchange, that it's a true motion. There's a flow of spirit involved. So in effect, it's kind of like you're looking for playmates. You're looking for people who have somewhere in their process gone through some amount of self-development, some amount of growth that allows them to carry something that is larger than themselves to a need that is also larger in the world. That's the do something piece. And so in effect, there's a bunch of discernments around that, and I guess what I'm trying to do is just to articulate them enough so that I remember them. But that's kind of where I'm at so far. Lon, you have follow up? Yeah.
Just a little bit of something to say. It's like we also so often forget that younger people are not to give yet; they're still to receive.
Yeah.
Like spouses, children, money, whatever they need to come to the place where they can grow into their maturity. It's like we forget. Like I know hundreds of young people, 30 years old, wanting to serve the world, and I'm like, but have you received what you need to receive first? It's like we really need to get the older people working. They've got work to do, and young people also should be reminded to receive what you need to receive first. Super important.
Yeah. There's definitely a balance, intra-generation and intergenerational. Right. Philip, you had another commenter or remark or question?
Well, I love this point. I think I'm seeing a lot in the chat about a specific question. I think multiple people have it, but I think Christian, I'll pass this back to you for one of your questions, if you're still here.
You said Christian?
Yeah, I said your name.
I didn't have a question, but I just wrote in the chat, in kind of putting language to what a part of what you were saying, Forrest, was skillful fluidity of prescribed roles. Or was it Alanya who was speaking when I said that? I can't remember now. Someone plus one that I assume that's why you called on me. I don't know if there's anything else.
I can ask the question. I think there's a lot of comments in the chat specifically asking, like, how do we cultivate or offer a space for people to have death, rebirth, play, really experience their gift?
Well, I think, we should reinstate Avalon. I mean, that's part of what that work was about. And, part of what EGP was about was essentially, I think that it's easier when you're working with smaller groups. And I think it's a little easier when you're working with people that are not necessarily like immediately your closest friends, but people that you know to be good people, but maybe are still able to sort of explore. There's enough uncertainty and ambiguity in the relationship to allow for new things to emerge, but there's enough trust in the relationships as well to know that things will be held. So I personally tend to favor smaller contexts and somewhat more I guess, exotic circumstances in terms of a little bit removed from regular day-to-day life. Containers that basically allow for a wider range of emotional expression, a wider range of process, but some clear guidelines. I mean, this goes back again to I think 2 sessions ago, where one of the things I learned from Alanya very specifically was this notion of, focus on the feelings, focus on, do you feel moved? Do you feel that it is your time to engage, or is there something that is calling you? Is there something that you feel you cannot not respond to? So there's a strong yin feeling piece as a practice to become aware of. Then there's the kind of embodiment. Where are you physically in your body? What are you feeling? What is your connection? Becoming aware of the space that you're in. Be aware of the context in which you are engaging, and to really create connection in that space. I'm probably not articulating it nearly as well as you would, Alanya, but these are things that I feel are kind of keys to what I've learned in some of the practices that have been put together for people to explore some of these things.
I think the one and utmost important one. So if I am to heal, or if I am to feel my death or my traumas or things that I'm afraid of, I would need to know that you love me before I become vulnerable in front of you. So there has to be someone that can meet you. So every trauma is created in relation, and therefore also needs to be healed in relation. And some of the traumas are so hardcore into our body system, like they even go beyond our thought. So we have pre-verbal traumas that are created before age 3. And these traumas, they need safety to such a level that you know that the person would die for you. Or at least that's what the inner child of you require. To find these people is not easy, because they need to be mature. They need to know the pain. They need to have been there themselves, and they need to have healed these parts of themselves to be able to hold you. And this I couldn't find in the Norwegian psychiatry. So then I created Avalon. And there's such a need. And the parts of us that cannot trust, like they are the parts that have made us survive so far in our lives. But we outgrow in a way, we had a pain happening to us as children. And then we create ways to never get that pain again. And so we become the nice guy, the girl that never cries, the one that never speaks up for themselves, the one that just cares for everyone else, or the angry one that's always angry, to protect the part that doesn't want to ever feel that pain again. But then we come to the second part of life, and we understand that this is more hard to live with, or our health is declining. And so we actually need to go down and pick up the parts. And if we do this, we come down to the core wound, the core pain, and who is going to hold you there? So I've had situations in Avalon where both me and Tom has held a person for 6 hours for them to, maybe for the first time in their lives, breathe freely and feel trust again. So these places are too few. There are too few places where humanity can be fully met, so that you can release the anxiety, you can release the fear, you can rediscover who was I before this pain entered into me. And then you get all these crazy people that suddenly has a lot of power, but they have a power as a 3-year-old, not very smart, but they need to grow up the capacity for joy again. They have the capacity to have to grow up capacities to be able to be angry in an adequate way, not as a 3-year-old. And this is where you see the traumas all over the world that creates war, is the fight traumas that are saying, you are stupid, I don't like you. Like 2 sentences, then it's a pre-verbal trauma. They're afraid underneath, but they're fighting to survive by bringing the fight out. I'm sorry that was long, but this is
No, it's
very
entirely
clear
appropriate.
and deep to my heart. And so
Yeah.
if you have had a capacity in you to go deep somewhere in you, then you are the person to meet another person that hasn't dared to go that far down yet. Be that person, please.
When Alanya was listing the different kinds of responses, the helper response, the sort of withdrawal, I mean, the different kinds of modalities with which people, because of pain early in life, have potentially created compensation mechanisms or adaptations or methods by which they will not have that experience again. This has a profound influence on how people can or can't play, how they can or can't collaborate. And so in effect, part of the reason, she mentioned a couple times how I was, when I first met her, I was kind of testing her. Well, I was really trying to see whether or not Alanya had the knowledge and the skills as to really understand why these issues mattered. And obviously, I think you can see from the fact that we have been more or less collaborating ever since, that not only did that bar be passed, but it was greatly exceeded, and that in effect, once we have really come to work with our own process in our own psyches, our own selves, that we end up being more available to other people. We end up being more available to higher orders of work. We end up able to be in devotion in a cleaner way. And so in a sense, there's a kind of capacity building here where if I'm looking to collaborate with people and so there's some people coming into my field that I could potentially collaborate with, in fact, I'm trying to be discerning about the level of their health, the level of their emotional maturity, the level of their capacity to have their imagination not be bound by the past that has limited them, but essentially the freedoms that has given through the knowledge of that experience, right? If a person's gone through a trauma and healed it, they can now meet someone who has had that trauma and heal that. That's now a capacity. And then when they've gone through that experience together, now there's a way to essentially, through the knowledge of what can go wrong, to have a pointer to what can work. What are the kinds of ways that we can be together in a healthier way? So in effect, it's sort of like little by little, by learning these different perspectives, we can begin to triangulate towards what does work. If I know that coming away from this kind of experience means that better is in that direction, and if I have this other kind of trauma and I heal that, and it points that better is in this direction, maybe those two lines intersect somewhere or another that indicates what does healthy, fully embodied, fully integrated, responsive to the environment, responsive to other people, responsive to the spirit of themselves, that all of that is integrated in a truly holistic way. If we can create a kind of series of templates that help us to discern ways to move in the direction that effectively creates health and vitality, individually and collectively, through this process of collaboration, through this process of play and healing and so on, I think that ultimately we can create actual cultures, actual civilization. And so in effect, I see these things as deeply connected. It's hard for me to imagine a basketball player being able to do so if they don't have arms or legs. And so in effect, if we're going to talk about communication, not being able to listen or do perspective taking to really understand the point of view of the other, to really know what it feels like to be them, then it's a bit like trying to play basketball without arms or legs, or without the ball. I mean, without anything. I mean, there's a sense here where, to be able to be in community, there are some kind of fundamental things. There's a sense by which we can show up in a kind of embodied, honest, authentic way. There's a sense at which we can connect in a way that is genuinely to something that is larger than ourselves. There's a way to do so in effect that allows us to have an attitude that moves from fear and pain back to the joy and the love which gives it birth. There's this whole thing about understanding the dynamics of emotion to basically recognize that anger and fear and pain, frustration, and all these things, they're ways to become more aware of what matters, more aware of what we care about, what's meaningful, and why we're building the sandcastle. What is the essence of that engagement? What is the artfulness with which we live? It's interesting to me. In the title of this sort of conversation, friend of mine, a colleague of mine, a person who's actually just sitting right across from me, who's helped me to be here today, basically suggested this title, and the last part of it, the high arts. Nobody asked what that was, and I was a little reluctant to answer that question because there's a lot more to it than I can easily put into words. But one of the things that is a high art is communication. Right? There's a kind of dance involved in communication process that it's we can think of dance as an embodied thing, as something that we do with our bodies and engage with another person, and to really be able to be seen and to see others in a deep way. And we can explore, how dance can move into an interactive way. I used to do martial arts, and although I never developed any tremendous skill in that space, I came to appreciate the ways in which people could dance together. They call it sparring, but it's really a way in which there's a kind of engagement that has a reciprocity to it, has a mutuality to it that goes even deeper than just dancing. When we think about communication in the verbal sense, when we think about how we show up for one another and the ways in which we care for one another and the ways in which we can do things in the world which have larger implications than that which just touches our own lives, I am continually brought back to this notion of how do we connect internally? How do we connect with the world, as in nature, as in, the sort of physics of just walking around? And how do we connect with other? What are the ways in which we deepen these connections and heal the wounds so that those connections can become more vitalized, more real? To, in a sense, discover the artfulness of togetherness. Not because it has some function to create some product for some company so that people can earn more money so that they can effectively buy more expensive cell phones and find themselves in disconnection, but so that they can actually be together in a way that is essentially beautiful. And so that's why I think of communication as a high art. Alanya, please go ahead.
Yeah, I see in the thread the conversation about trauma. It's like, yeah, we can go there, but I really want to come at you as a community by being like, as we need to understand trauma, we more than that need to learn to find a willingness to be in compassion with trauma, no matter what kind of trauma. Like, there are different ways to traumas, early childhood, we have development traumas, we have so much, but what every person with any kind of pain needs is to be seen and be met. Like, that's the ground, and that we can do, all of us, everyone. And so sometimes, like, people come to Avalon and they want to say, oh, well, I'm diagnosed with this. So it's like, okay, so who let you into Avalon? That's not what we do. We meet each other. We meet what arises, what emerges in the connection. And this is why I would have loved for this to be a 2-hour more conversation, because I would really have loved to hear from Lisa, from Robert, from all of you. I would have loved to hear, where are you at in your need for play and for being seen in your trauma, or being the one seeing or being with someone in trauma? How do you actually do that? And I just want to leave one thing. We often think that communication is eye to eye in front of each other. I just want to leave this in the group. If you see a person that is frozen or angry, or you know that they're in reaction, like from their solar plexus, in reaction towards something, I think the most hostile thing they will experience is someone coming into their face. Very practical thing. Go to their side and be with them, not against them. Because most traumas either come from in front or back. So if you're physically on the side, you might not be threatening and the person might be able to be met by you. And I don't know why this is so important for me to bring here, but it just was important. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm realizing that we are maybe close to the session. I don't know what the possibilities are for continuing or not, but I can at least suggest that given this is the fourth and kind of the last opportunity I might get to speak for a little while, I did want to draw people's attention to ways of staying connected, at least to me. I mean, you know, Alanya, I think I'll forward that to you as well, but I have a website, mflb.com. That's Mary, Frank, Larry, and Bob, I guess, 4 letters, MFLB. And I've been posting most of my writing and content to that. If you want to have me notify you when I'm posting new things or putting stuff up, please in the chat, probably privately to me, send me an email address or a phone number. If you send me an email address, I'll send you an email just letting you know a way to stay in touch or you know, new content on the website if you're interested. If you send me a phone number, I'll send a text message. And this will be basically directly from me. I'm not trying to maintain a mail list or anything like that. But so in effect, I'm just basically offering that, you know, I continue to do things in between STOA sessions. And if people are wanting to kind of follow along where I'm at, that's the way to do so. And as far as time and stuff is concerned, I have to leave that up to Peter and Philip. I don't know if you see him on here or not, or what the continuance would be.
I just want to say very shortly, I will not take any one of the difficult questions. All of that goes to Forrest Landry, okay? But I just want to share that I've been invited to come to you as a community. And if you'd like me to do that, I would love to. I might drag Forrest with me to answer all the difficult questions. But every question that has to do with embodiment, spirituality, psychology, I would love to come back. And I would also love for you to bring the questions to me through Philip or someone. I have a life, I have 5 kids. And so, no, I will not speak to everyone, but I would love to come back to the platform and play with you. I'll take the playing part. That's me. Thank you. I'd love to get to know you guys. Thank you. And thank you, Forrest, for bringing me and for you having
Very
me.
glad to do so. Beautiful to do. Philip, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, we would love to have you guys back again as single or as double. You guys make a fantastic tandem and really enjoyed today's chat. Yeah, we are a little bit over time, and obviously I think you guys are talking about meaningful things, and I think it's worth people's time. At least personally, I feel like whenever I come out of these sessions, I have a new thought in terms of like what is meaningful and what's a more maybe artful way of living life. And I think that's super valuable, and hopefully you guys have also felt that, and that we've all kind of developed over these last 4 sessions to become more whole and together, and hopefully this has a ripple effect into the larger community, into the coming years and in the future. And so part of that, I know that Forrest self-proclaims himself as like a private person, sometimes private person, but I do want to have everybody kind of shower him with love to really show how much we care about him here in the STOA, so that, you know, potentially he can come back. I know he's a busy man, but we would love to have him back. And this is ideally a good space for us to have some of these conversations. So if you guys wanted to unmute, I'd probably extended half a minute for you guys to just shower Alanya and Forrest with appreciation.
Thank you both so much. This has been lovely.
Thank you, Forrest. Thank you, Anya.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you both very much for coming.
Generous of you
It's
to
been great.
share all of your stories with us. It's been great. Very, very, very thankful. Thank you so very much.
Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year. All right.
Thank you.
You are most
Happy
welcome.
New Year, all of you.
Thanks.
Act. When touched, act.
All right.
It's been delightful, and I'm looking forward to the next time I come back. I'm sure there'll be more occasions, but in the interim, like I said, just drop me a line and I can stay in touch with you that way.
Great. Feel free to do that in the chat. I'll leave this up and running for a little while. I don't have Peter's fancy music to outro you, so we're just going to start with faces. See you.